all day we've been asking for your questions relating to Rishi Sunak's large yes, if you can call it that. We, as I say, got so many questions. Well, with me to answer them are Miatta Fahnbulleh, CEO of the New Economics Foundation, personal finance expert Gemma Godfrey, they're here with me in the studio, and Anna Stevenson, senior welfare benefits specialist at the charity Turn to Us. Very welcome to you all. Thank you very much indeed. We have, as I just said there, got loads and loads of questions, so I'm going to plough straight into them. Some of them specific, some of them a bit more general. So our first question is this, and I suppose it's one that so many people have. Is the relief for energy costs going to be means tested? Well, let me start with you then, Anna. Is the answer to that, I mean, I'm starting it off, is it kind of yes and no?
Yes and no, or a little bit of it depends. There have been a few different schemes announced today. The really, really big one is universal. That's £400 off winter energy bills for everyone who's paying an energy bill. So that one's definitely not means tested. We've got extra help for pensioners. That's not means tested. That's based on your age. We've got extra help for disabled people. It's not means tested, but it's based on getting non-means tested disability benefits, things like attendance allowance or personal independence payment. And then there's additional targeted support, £650 payment for people who are on means tested benefits. So technically that's not means tested. It will be £650 regardless of whether you're towards the top of the universal credit income scale or towards the bottom, but it's based on getting one of those means tested benefits. OK, so that's clear and leads into the next question. I'm going to just stay with you on that, Anna, then. So what are the income thresholds for these payments and how are they being paid? How will people get them? You're already telling us that when it comes to we've called it means tested, but they're shadowing the universal credit thresholds. Yeah, so these are based on you getting one of the means tested benefits. So that's universal credit, that's pension credit, income support, income related employment and support allowance, income related job seekers allowance, child tax credits, working tax credits, this big set of means tested benefits. Now, I can't give you an easy income threshold because these benefits are based on your circumstances. But what you can really easily do is go to the Turn to Us website and do a free benefit calculator to check if you could be getting any of these benefits. They are really underclaimed, especially pension credit. So there's not an income threshold, but they're based on these means tested benefits. In terms of how they're being paid, they're going to be paid automatically to people who are receiving those benefits. The assumption is that they'll be paid through the same means that you get your benefits. So if you get your benefit by a direct transfer, that'll be how you get it, which most people do. So
it'll come straight in. Right, well, let's concentrate on our next question, which is asking about the £400 that nearly all households are getting. And this question asks... there you are. When is the £400 aid likely to be given to customers? If it is in October, as predicted, how will this help people that are already in fuel debt now? Miatta, I mean, because, of course, you know, the cap already went up substantially, over £600 in April, and it's quite a long time to wait. Well, it is a long time to wait.
Well, the cap went up by between £600 and £800. We're expecting it to go up by another £800 in October. So this £400 will help. It's going to go to energy companies that should take it off your bill. There's a bit of trust there, but they should take it off your bill. But in truth, for a lot of people, it just won't be enough. It will take the sting off, but you're still seeing a whopping £1,100 that you're having to suck up this year, on top of rising prices for food and other things. So it helps, but not as much as it does.
And just what about this issue of the non-targeted nature of the £400? I mean, you know, is that an efficient use of funds, which are pretty short?
The short answer is no. I think they were thinking about the easiest and quickest way, so just give it to everyone and give it to the energy companies and you don't have to deal with the admin. My view is that they probably should have raised the windfall tax by a bit more and got a little bit more money and then targeted those in the middle that don't get benefits but are really struggling.
That's a very, very good point. You're anticipating our next question because so many millions of people will be asking that, saying, well, OK, you know, I don't get universal credit, but boy, are we struggling. Here's the question. What help is available to people who aren't entitled to universal credit? Anna, what help is available elsewhere? I mean, do we know? Oh, sorry, Gemma.
No, it's fine, it's fine. So, I mean, this is the big problem exactly with some of the government's measures. And we saw this when the government came out with furlough, which was that people would fall through the cracks. And it's great to have, and it's incredibly important to support people that are on benefits, and it's easier to identify them. But you have a whole raft of people that are working really hard, don't qualify for the benefit support, and they're not going to be able to see as much support as they need to. If you also look at some of the measures that came out, certain, council tax rebates came in, but again, only for certain households. So the government's kind of tried this act of, give everybody a certain level of support that isn't targeted enough, and then targeted level of support at the bottom end, and there are just millions of people that are just not going to benefit.
I mean, but that is the issue, isn't it? Where do you draw the lines? And we've got so many questions about that. Here's our next one. Again, about lines, I suppose. If the winter fuel allowance is currently shared between two state pensioners living together as a couple, will the £300 extra payment also be shared? That is one for you, Anna. So, two pensioners living together. How is the money divvied up, and is it cut?
Yes, from the information we've received from the Treasury so far, it looks like that £300 payment is for a household, not for an individual. OK, very clear, and that's all the answer we need. Another question, does today's announcement mean the original £200 help in October will not have to be paid back through our energy bills? Gemma, yeah, because people... people, I suppose, really didn't quite understand that £200 was going to be clawed back over, what was it? It was 5 years or something, wasn't it?
It was
through
5
bills?
years. Well, that was the whole issue. They came out and announced, here you go, you have £200, and then the small print was, but you have to pay it back. And actually, it wasn't over a long enough period that we think that the energy prices are going to be able to adjust backwards. So they have come out today because of the backlash, really, and they've said, OK, they're going to double the allowance of £400 and you don't have to pay it back, which otherwise would have been madness.
The other thing, wasn't it, about the £200 it was about the household and the bill. So if you moved house, if you were renting or whatever, or shared house, well, then, somebody else who moves in has to pay it back.
It would have been an administrative nightmare, which would have cost us millions.
Yeah. OK, this windfall tax, then, on excess profits, as defined, doesn't impact households. This is the question. Why won't the energy cap be reinstated if it's obvious the energy suppliers are reaping the majority of the awards? Miatta, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, so in the government, to be fair to the government, where the big excess profits are being made are the energy generators. The people who are supplying us are sort of retailers, people like British Gas, EDF, have actually, they are being squeezed because they're the ones that are they have the cap that's sort of bearing down on the costs that they can pass on. So for me, what the government should have done is say, look, let's properly tax those that are making excess profits, and let's use that to cushion consumers. And they did that a little bit, hence why we've got the 400, but not enough.
Properly taxed. So what would you like to have seen?
Well, so the numbers we were talking about is tax 70%, which they ended up doing about 65%, tax 70%, but without this tax deduction.
A lot of relief, isn't there?
Yeah, a lot of relief that basically takes most of it away. That would have raised about 13 billion. And then you use that 13 billion to help the squeeze middle.
But I also think there's another thing that they could have done, which is one of the reasons we're in this problem is because a lot of suppliers also went bust and there isn't enough competition in the market. So a lot of people have been asking, should they go around and check for a better deal? And there's just not enough competition. So actually, what you also need to see is some support for smaller providers to bring competition back into the market as well.
OK, got another quick one before we need to take a break. Anna, short and sweet if you can. What help will there be for people like me that can't go to work due to illness? Will there be extra help for the disabled community?
There will, yes. So particularly if you're getting personal independence payment, adult disability payment, attendance allowance, disability living allowance. Sorry, I know it's a big, long list, but you won't be getting all of them. If you're getting any of those benefits, there'll be an extra £150 one-off payment in December. It's likely you may also be able to benefit from some of the other schemes as well, because all these schemes are cumulative. That's important to remember. So you'll get £150 and you'll get the £400. And if you're on means-tested benefits, you'll get the £650.
And if you're a pensioner, the winter fuel allowance.
Yes, exactly. It'll all mount up to add extra support for people who have these multiple layers of vulnerability.
OK, that's really useful advice. Thank you all very much indeed so far. But you're staying with me for quite a long time. We're going to take a short break. You're watching a question and answer programme about the cost of living. So do stay with us, because we'll be tackling more of your incredibly important questions right after the break. Stay with us. Well, joining me tonight to answer your questions about the cost of living are Miatta Fahnbulleh, CEO of the New Economics Foundation, personal finance expert Gemma Godfrey, and Anna Stevenson, senior welfare benefits specialist at the charity Turn to Us. So we have all the talent, a brains trust here. Let's get into your questions. And this one asks, low-income families need instant support. How do you believe a rise in winter fuel payments, which won't kick in until next year, will help struggling and vulnerable people? Miatta, again, we address this slightly with the other payments, but it's the gap, it's the lag.
It is the lag. It is the lag, and I think a lot of people are already under pressure. To be fair, some of it will kick in early in the autumn, but I think where we will get to is that people will get to the back end of this year and they will just be under phenomenal pressure. And the key thing to say is what we're seeing at the moment is the impact of rising energy prices. We know that's going to have a knock-on effect on everything else. It's having a knock-on effect on food. It's having a knock-on effect on everyday household essentials. And then you have the Ukraine impact. So I think we're about to see quite a hefty hit this autumn, winter. And at the moment, they've taken the sting out the tail, but they haven't really resolved that issue.
Let's talk about that hefty hit, because our next question addresses that. And I did not know this. This is a householder who says that my energy summary for the next 12 months forecasts that my energy bill will more than double. My goodness me. What are the government doing with the extra VAT that they will receive from us? Of course, Gemma, they're raking in a lot of extra VAT because,
Absolutely.
that hasn't gone. What is it, 5% on energy?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that there was a lot of pressure for the government to do was cut VAT. Because if there's a windfall tax on the energy providers, then likewise, they're getting a windfall from the VAT. Obviously, the way the government's positioning this is the VAT that they make will then be funneled back into the benefits. And I think if you actually look at everything they've done today, their total budget, it brings it to £37 billion that they've been using to support families. So that's what they're going to be doing. But obviously, it's not as targeted as it should be. It's late in the game. And at this point, if you have energy prices as high as that, one of the things we haven't mentioned is debt. If people fall into debt, then obviously you've got a debt burden. If interest rates go up, as they are, then the price of having that debt burden continues to go up, and people then fall further and further under the cosh. It
applies to governments as well, doesn't it? Because the government's debt burden, their repayments, they're eye-watering at the moment.
Well, so the key thing to say is not just VAT. The government has had a massive boon in tax receipts because of inflation. So if we think back to the spring statement, the thing that was very clear was the government was getting more money than expected. It was paying down its deficit quicker than expected. It's due to make a surplus next year. So he had quite a lot of headroom. And for me, I wanted to see more of that headroom. Yes, there was targeted support for low-income families, for example, but it's a one-off payment. Why are we not rebuilding our social security safety net? The reason why a lot of people are at the point where they're not eating or heating is because we've hacked away at benefits for about 10 years. And so they were already on the breadline, and then you chuck the shock, and that's what happened. So that headroom should have been used to build our resilience, not just for this winter, but for next year and the year after. And that's what he has the space to do with that tax boon, and he hasn't chosen to do that yet.
Here's the crystal ball question. Who wants to stick their neck out? What do you think will happen to gas and electricity prices over the next 2 years? Well, Miatta, we mentioned the war in Ukraine. Who knows how long that will last? But even with or without it, well, energy just seems to be going up and up.
Yeah, so all the predictions are we're likely to see this for another sort of 12 to 18 months. And there is, part of the problem is there are external forces, but also our energy market is quite broken. So when you look at wholesale prices, they've actually all dropped. But a lot of the energy providers bought in future markets at high prices. So consumers are bearing the brunt of that. I think it's going to take us a couple of years for this to shake out. And I hope in that time, the government isn't just providing short-term support, but it's thinking about how do we get this broken market to actually work for consumers, because at the moment it's
market,
not.
Yeah. Anna, I've got a couple of questions for you. Let's have a look at this one. I support the government giving help to those with benefits. However, I am a single person who works and have a lower income. The cost of energy, food and fuel is pushing me into serious financial crisis. What help is there for me, a single person who works and has a low income and, of course, all those costs going up? What help?
So this can be really challenging. Single people don't get the same work allowances, the same additional support that you see in universal credit for families. And so that can mean that it is much, much harder to support the income of single people. It is still worth, a lot of people just assume that they can't get benefits. It is still worth doing a benefit calculator, seeing if there is any help they can get. They will get this £400 off their energy bills in the winter. It is still worth shopping around on your other utilities to see if there is any money you can save. But they are, at the moment, the group of people who are the most challenging to support.
And it's not just central government that has funds, isn't it? Local authorities have been given relief funds as well. You can sometimes access them.
They have, yeah. Local authorities have been given extra funding to provide discretionary support for people who are in crisis, but we haven't yet seen the terms of these schemes. What we have seen when there were equivalent schemes last winter and the winter before was that they tended to target families with children and people with disabilities, because they tend to be the people who get the very worst outcomes when things go wrong.
And this council tax rebate, next question. The question is, why is the government just giving that on bands A to D? Is there any chance of that being expanded or extended?
So this bands A to D thing, this is exactly the problem that Miatta was talking about earlier, that it's really, really hard in our current data to target middle income households. It's quite easy to identify the very lowest income households, but the government was trying to provide semi-targeted support towards middle income households, and they went with council tax as the mechanism to do that. There is discretionary funding that's been given to councils for people who are in higher council tax bands, but who didn't qualify for the £150 council tax rebate and who are in crisis. So if you're really struggling, do approach your council about that.
Well, as in so many cases in life, that data really matters, the quality and the quantity. Last question to squeeze in this section. Gemma, this is really getting you to stick your neck out, right? I heard you as you read it there. Is now a good time to get a mortgage? Who knows?
I'm not going to say yes or no. Let me explain how to decide. So first of all, the context is that interest rates have been creeping up and they're at 1%. And yes, it's the highest of 13 years, but it's been an unprecedented period. And actually, if you look at it, in 1992, interest rates were over 10%. So there's a huge amount that they could continue to rise. So the three things to think about are, if you want to get a mortgage, I mean, ultimately, if you're going to get a mortgage because you're looking to buy a property, you know, and you'll need one to buy one. But the three things to think about are, number one, about paying for the privilege of fixing your mortgage, to protect you from higher interest rates. But you will have to pay, so to make sure that that's actually worth your while. Secondly, consider when you'll want to move, because again, a mortgage, the term of the mortgage, there'll be early repayment fees if you want to move within that time. And thirdly, affordability is a really key issue that actually mortgage lenders are much more focused on adding 3% to the current, their highest rate at the moment, and working out whether, if the rate was 3% higher, whether you could still afford it.
Is there also a guess, though, for anyone buying into property now about the possible impact of a recession on house prices? Because, you know, whether you get a good deal on your mortgage or not, if you're losing equity in your home, it doesn't really matter what rate you're paying. You don't like it. It's not good for you.
I always say that buying a house is more, I mean, it's not really, we call it an investment, but it's really somewhere that you live.
Right.
And that if you really want to make money out of property, with all the costs of moving and selling, all this stuff, that actually it's more about, OK, are you going to rent, or is it better value if you actually buy now? What can you afford? How long do you want to live there? Are you raising a family. All these other things, I think, come to play.
Very important. OK, taking a break, as I say, you're watching a special question and answer programme about the cost of living. Stay with us. Next up amongst the questions, we'll be addressing the issue of whether all this extra money in the economy will prove to be inflationary. Stay with us. As you probably know by now, joining me tonight to answer your questions about the cost of living are Miatta Fahnbulleh, CEO of the New Economics Foundation, personal finance expert, Gemma, Godfrey, and Anna Stevenson, senior welfare benefits specialist with the charity Turn to Us. We're going to turn to more of your questions. This one concerning help for businesses and through them help for employees. Is there a way to support businesses by giving employees a pay rise to help with this increasing inflation, 9-10% at the moment? Miatta, well, I suppose there's the minimum wage, the living wage.
There is the national living wage, which the Chancellor, to be fair, did increase. I think the key thing is the living wage ought to reflect the true cost of living, and at the moment it doesn't. So he increased it to about £9.50 outside of London, and we know that with inflation that level should be much higher. I do think there is a piece around where we build that. It's tough for businesses as well at the moment, but actually trying to get to people where you're earning an income that allows you to afford the cost of living must be the objective in all of this.
And just a big picture question mentioning inflation in terms of the economy overall. Now, I'm not an expert, you are, but isn't putting lots of money into the economy a risk when inflation is already rising? You know, I mean, people need the money to spend, but that then starts perhaps pushing up inflation even more.
Well, there is a risk, but I think the key thing is to remember what's driving inflation. So the big drivers of inflation are imported. It's kind of global pressures, energy supply chain, etc. It's not the fact that the demand is overheating. The economy is overheating. There's lots of demand. So actually, we are on the cusp of recession, which means that demand is actually falling. So giving money, particularly to people at the lower end who will spend it in their local economies on essential things, I don't think it's going to spike up inflation. I think, if anything, it's going to potentially help us stem the worst impacts of recession.
I get it. So it's the cause of inflation. So it's really these supply chain blockages at the moment.
Exactly.
Thank you very much indeed for that. Another question then. I'll put this one to you, Gemma. My fixed rate deal with Scottish Power finishes at the end of the month, going from, get this, £80 to £400. Multiple of 5 per month. What is the best thing to do? I mean, that is an incredible increase. What's your advice?
I mean, the real challenge is the traditional advice would be shop around. Shop around, try and get the best deal. But you can't at the moment because actually a lot of suppliers went bust and there isn't as much competition in the market. And also, they're savvy. Suppliers are savvy. And you have to pay for the privilege of fixing it at a certain rate. And the concern is that you may actually be paying too much at the moment in time because there's so little choice out there. People are so fearful. So actually, in some respects, some of the best advice is actually wait and see, which is a horrible thing to say. But really, I think there are so many families out there that are struggling, that are doing what they can, that putting pressure and saying that there may be a better deal out there is unrealistic.
So, I mean, you know, do you really have to take the money the government's giving you and cross your fingers and hope, OK, the price cap we know is going up again in October, then when it's reviewed by April 2023, that it starts to dip? That's all you can do?
Well, the problem is, what are the alternatives to that? So it is about making sure that you're getting the right government support. But absolutely, with the fact that the energy cap is bound to go up, energy suppliers know that, and therefore there's going to be no fixed rate that will protect you from that. It is a very tough time. OK,
next question. This one, again, about pensioners. What happened to the triple lot for pensioners? Have the government gone back on their promise? Well, Anna, I know a bit about that. Well, yeah, a bit. Tell us more.
So the triple lock is a policy that guaranteed that pensions would go up by at least certain averages. So there were 3 different rules and it would go up by the lowest of them. The government has slightly abandoned its promise on one of those because one of those was average earnings. And when average earnings went very peculiar during the pandemic, the government took the decision that they would not be uprating pensions in line with average earnings for a bit. The other issue is that they have gone up in line with inflation. The trouble is that the rules by which benefits and pensions are uprated in line with inflation, it uses the inflation rate in September to set the amount they'll go up in April. And of course, this year, we saw inflation jump enormously between September and April. And so that increase that matched inflation back in September, by April was doing nothing. And by this winter, will be doing absolutely nothing. And so the hope had been, and there had been a lot of calls on the Chancellor to make an emergency uprating of benefits in line with current inflation. The Chancellor has not chosen to do that and has chosen instead to use these multiple different one-off payments.
OK, I see what you mean, yes. So they could fast forward that, but it doesn't seem they are going to at the moment. More on energy costs, and this about the green levy within everyone's bills. The question is, why can't this be removed or at least reduced? Miatta, I mean, that's not just then about the money, that's about the long term and then ultimately about the climate crisis.
So it's a false economy because we have to remember what this is paying for. It's paying for things like energy efficiency, which ironically is the thing that will get down the cost of bills for the long term. It's also paying for, different types of kind of renewables and that transition that we need to make, which again will help with our security. So getting rid of it is the wrong thing to do.
Temporarily, though, just a pause?
But what I do think the government should do is take it off bills in the way it is and puts it into general taxation, because it's a far more progressive way to do it. At the moment, people at the bottom end will pay more because they tend to pay, their energy bills tend to be a bigger chunk of their income. So I'm actually all for removing it from levies. It was never, for me, a good way to do it.
Can I throw in then, what about VAT as well? Well, that was meant to be a Brexit bonus, not allowed to do it under the EU. The government can now do it, but it hasn't.
It hasn't done it, but to be fair to them, removing VAT would be about 100 odd quid. So in the grand scale of the support that people need, it probably is sort of tinkering around the margins, and it isn't targeted. So actually trying to get cash payments for that middle is a far better way to do it. OK, here's another specific question, but it does concern the green ambitions, the green necessity for us all. Why has HMRC not increased the pence per mile for company car drivers of electric cars? The price cap went up 50% on electric, yet the rate I can claim from my employer is still only 5p a mile. Who knows about this? Gemma, I mean, there's basically a bigger gap growing up again in this area.
I mean, I think this is a fantastic question, and obviously it doesn't have an easy answer, because why? The answer is that the government should have been able to make sure that people that are deciding to make greener decisions are going to be better for our economy and our move to net zero and having more renewable sources of energy and less reliance and lower energy bills. People who are able to do that and helping us should get more support, and they're not. And that's really, my big concern is that, again, it's like windfall taxes on oil and gas producers, but they'll give them tax relief. What about all the other alternatives that will make our supply much stronger? OK, there are always consequences, aren't there? Now we've got a couple of minutes left, so let's get a couple more questions in. Anna, try this for size. Shouldn't the energy providers be reducing the cost on prepay meters or apply credits for people? Because prepay meters, I mean, often it's the people who can least afford it on prepay meters, and they're paying higher rates.
Yeah, there is a higher energy price cap for prepay customers. The justification for that has been that it costs a little bit more to run the infrastructure, but this is a really major problem that disproportionately affects the lowest income households. It is very, very important that they are considered very carefully through this winter, because what happens is that they just self-disconnect. This is the mild term that gets applied to it. What that means is they don't have any money to put in the meter, and so they just sit there in the cold, in the dark, and it ends up being somewhat invisible in a way that, whereas, people who prepay, who pay with, who get energy bills, they can run up debt and still stay connected to their electricity for quite a long time, whereas prepay meters, the whole point is that you can't, but that causes immense suffering to people on the lowest incomes. So it is really important to make sure that these people are protected through this winter.
Yeah, Ofgem should do something about that, certainly. Let's get one last in before Our last break. Why is our government making energy prices so high when other countries in Europe haven't seen the same increases? Miatta, well, I suppose, is that all about sources of supply and storage?
Yeah. Well, so that's a million-dollar question, and I think it comes back to the market. And I think it comes back to the fact that the market isn't working. So if you look across to France, they've got a public sector provider, EDF, it's owned by citizens, and the governments basically say, you take the hit. You take the hit, and actually the rises we've seen are about 4% compared to what we're seeing here. So different countries have different ways in which they're supplying energy. I think the way that we have it is very, very broken, and consumers have long paid the price of that, and they're paying the price again. And so in all of this, there is a big reform story. When we get onto the other side of this, it's like, how do you break up that market? And by the way, use the opportunities of bringing in more renewables to diversify that market, to build up our security. And I would say have more of that market owned by people like me and you, through cooperatives, through community-owned energy, in a way that's far more democratic and that works in our interests rather than the interests of those that make profits.
So, Gemma, in a way, have we in this country got the worst of all worlds? You know, we had, multiplicity of providers, as you described earlier. Lots of them have gone bust, which leads us to the pickle we're in. Would it be better, not longer Miatta, then, that in the end, well, let's get back to a big people-owned supply, and we can look after the prices ourselves.
We just need multiple people-owned supply.
Right, yeah, well,
we need to have multiple dynamics, and I think that's the problem. There's not much that we can do to be able to help bring more security to our energy markets.
Good. Break coming up. You're watching a special question and answer programme about the cost of living. Do stay with us. After the break, we're going to be asking about any plans to help first-time buyers. Stay with us. Joining me tonight to answer your questions about the cost of living crisis are, you know them all by now, a panel of experts. They really are experts. So let's, rather than me introducing them again, let's get some more questions in, because we have had so many from you. This is very short. Gemma, are there any plans to help first-time buyers? Well, there are already quite a few schemes around, aren't they?
I mean, there are already. So in terms of is there any new news, the answer is no.
Well, what are the existing ones? Talk us through.
I mean, well, you have things like you had LISAs, lifetime ISAs, the ability to be able to save, and if you save for a certain number of years, then obviously the government will then provide you a certain level of savings to match the amount that you've saved to put towards a deposit, and if you don't use that, then it would go towards a pension. So there have been a few things out there, but I think the big challenge for first-time buyers is, first of all, is the fact that a bigger deposit is now needed, that a lot of mortgage providers are actually getting a little bit more savvy, and the affordability level is getting higher and higher. Also, the thing that has changed as well is there has been a period where the average cost of a mortgage per month was cheaper than rent, and actually for the first time that's now reversed. So, and again, interest rates are going up. So I think there's about 3/4 of people that are on mortgages haven't fixed them. This is a real issue for people in the market at the moment.
Do you think, though, if the housing market starts to stall or shows the appearance of doing that the government might bring in, stamp duty holidays again or something like that?
I mean, it's a very easy lever for them to pull, and it's something they've done before, because I think the big cohort that we're talking about now are the first-time buyers, because, of course, people that are already in the property market, well, then they'll benefit. Yes, they may sell lower, but they'll also buy lower. But I think if there's a problem with the property market stagnating and they need to keep that going, then that is something the government can do.
Let's talk now a bit more about the targeting of this money, and it's a very straightforward question. Why not contribute to a minimum wage increase instead? Anna, what are your thoughts about that? Why that really does help people in work who just don't earn very much.
It does, but the people who are the most vulnerable to rising energy bills are pensioners and people who are disabled and can't work. And an increase in minimum wage wouldn't do anything to help them.
OK. Miatta? We talked about the living wage, the minimum wage.
Yeah, so look, in the end, the priority has to be those at the sharp end of it. But I think there are many people on minimum wage who will also be on universal credit and will benefit. But, there is a piece in all of this about how we get wages to rise to keep up with the cost of living, particularly at the bottom end, and we haven't got that right yet.
Yeah, and isn't also the issue is about looking at it long term. A lot of the time it's about, let's make sure that... a lot of employers are under a lot of pressure, and I think also what we want to do is try and stimulate the economy, create more job creation, and, certain measures that might put them under pressure to make people redundant because they can't afford them anymore, I think would be a real...
And they've already had that national insurance increase as well, which seems to be being overlooked. Right, long-term plan. Well, this is a good question. Is there any sign of a long-term plan in this announcement? It'll help this winter, no doubt. But isn't this just a sticking plaster when we need stitches, or as some in government say, when we need surgery? Miatta, long-term plan?
Yeah, there's no long-term plan in sight. This is a sticking plaster intervention, which, by the way, we needed a bit of sticking plaster because it was so dire and it was completely frustrating that the Chancellor moved as slowly as he did. But this gets us through the autumn, and beyond that, not much else, which is why, for me, there should have been a measure that was focused on bolstering social security, because we build that resilience in the long term, and we're still waiting for that. We needed to see things around energy efficiency, great homes upgrade. Imagine if we had a national effort that said we're going to insulate millions of homes over the course of the next 3 years to bear down on bills. And then you move to a reform agenda and say, look, how do we get wages up? How do we get markets that, should be working for people, not working for people? And there was none of that. So they've done enough to help people in the short term, to live another day, but they've not done enough. No
strategy. Different perspectives, I know, from you all on all of this. Staying with this question, Anna, what's your take on that? Does it seem, more or less reactive rather than proactive? No evidence of a really detailed plan.
Yeah, I mean, it's positive that the Chancellor has recognised that the social security system is a useful way of targeting support to the lowest income households. But we have seen 10 years of benefit freezes and changes in welfare policy that have just eaten and eaten away at the financial resilience of households. And so now we're in a situation where we lurch from crisis to crisis. We had COVID and we had emergency measures put in, and then we had inflation and we had emergency measures put in, and then they weren't enough and we had some more emergency measures put in. And this lurching from crisis to crisis is no good for the economy, it's no good for the country, it's no good for the lowest income people. It just doesn't work. We need a welfare benefit system that enables people to live and thrive and participate fully in society.
Anna, do you detect strategy here or reaction?
Well, I think absolutely it's reactive. And I think one of the other things is if you look at the reasons why we've got higher inflation, it's also because of supply chain issues. You had Brexit, you've had people because of COVID going back to other countries, you've got more restriction around free workforces. There are all these other dynamics that are in play and none of them, we talk about, it's like if somebody's ill and we're only looking at the symptoms, we're not looking at the cause. And yes, we need to prop up people, but what are we doing to actually help stem the problem so that in a couple of years' time that these things can readjust? And I can't see any strategy there.
But of course, there is so much uncertainty out there, to be fair to anyone trying to come up with long-term plans. And this is one of the major challenges, well, not just for Europe, certainly for Ukraine, but for the entire world. If the war in Ukraine ends, will the cost of living decrease again? How long would it take to feel an impact? Well, who knows? But Miatta, what's the feeling? Will the cost of living decrease if we can end that conflict, if, the Russians can be removed from Ukraine?
That's our hope. But I think the key point to say is that it will mean it doesn't get worse. So the cost of living crisis was there even before Ukraine. And it was a consequence of Brexit. I know we're not allowed to talk about it anymore, but it was a consequence of Brexit. It was a consequence of supply bottlenecks coming out of the pandemic, some of which still haven't gone away. And it was a consequence of supply pressures here. We don't have enough energy security in this country. So there were all these fundamental problems anyway. And then you threw in the war in Ukraine. So I think we haven't fully felt the impact of the war in Ukraine. We're starting to feel it on things like food prices and energy on the margins, but it could get worse. So for me, it just means it doesn't get worse. OK,
worse before it gets better, and we don't know when that might happen. Last question, really interesting to get all your takes on that. Have to be fairly brief because we're nearly out of time. Are these policies just delaying an inevitable recession? Ooh, Gemma.
I mean, the challenge that we have is that a lot of families are struggling and they're fighting a war on multiple fronts. And that, I think, that's why otherwise we would be heading towards a recession. So, for example, you've got food prices going up, you've got travel prices going up, it's costing more to put a roof over your family's heads, as well as energy, keeping them warm. And I think having all of those battles is putting us on a path there, unless we can do something to be able to actually stem the rising cost of living across all these different markets.
And Anna, does this feel a bit like, for different reasons, though, a bit like 2008, 2009, where we're on a cliff edge?
I can't really answer that, but what I can say is that it is absolutely vital that we make sure that the very poorest are protected, because we are a compassionate, caring country. We do not want to see children going to school hungry. We do not want to see old people dying of the cold in their homes. And so we have to make sure that no matter what happens, the very poorest people are protected.
Well said. We'll end it on those words. Really good hearing that. Thank you all very much indeed. Anna Stevenson, really good hearing from you. Gemma, Godfrey, lovely having you here. Miatta Fahnbulleh, thank you so much for allowing us to access the brain cells. Really have benefited. An awful lot of news you can use, information you can use there.